Two men, two visions, one goal. Black progress in post-Reconstruction America. But while W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington shared the same endgame, racial equality, their roads, however, couldn't have been more different. Do we understand the whole machine? Or do we get a trade and do the best we can to survive? Today, we explore one of the most defining intellectual debates in African American history. Which path led to true liberation? Let's break it down. Welcome back to our channel. I'm Haas.
I'm CeCe.
Today we got a hot topic for you.
To understand their differences, we have to step back into the late 19th century. Slavery had ended, but for Black Americans, freedom was still a battle. Segregation laws, lynchings, and disenfranchisement plagued the South. The question was, how do we fight back? Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois had very different answers.
First, let's talk about Booker T. Washington. He was born Booker Taliaferro on April 5th, 1856, in a hut in Franklin County, Virginia, to an enslaved woman by the name of Jane and to a white man who is unknown but was thought to be a local plantation owner. His mother was a cook on the James Burroughs plantation.
One of Booker's jobs was to carry the Burroughs daughter's books back and forth to school, and while waiting for her, he would peek into the classrooms, longing for his own opportunity for education.
In 1865, 9-year-old Booker, his siblings, and his mother were freed at the end of the Civil War. His mother moved the family to Malden, West Virginia to meet up with her husband, Washington Ferguson, who had escaped slavery a few years earlier and found work in the West Virginia salt mines. Even though he was only 9 years old, upon moving to Malden, Booker began working as a packer in the salt mines. Every day, Booker rose at 3 a.m. to make his 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. shift at the salt mines, and then would attend school. For the next 2 years, he worked a second job after school in the local coal mines.
In 1871, he worked as a houseboy for the owner of the coal mines, who encouraged his educational pursuits. Then, in 1872, at 16, Booker enrolled in the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, now known as Hampton University, in Hampton, Virginia, under the name of Booker T. Washington in honor of his stepfather, Washington Ferguson.
And that young man was so dedicated to his education that he walked nearly 500 miles to get to the school.
Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute was founded a few years earlier in 1868 by Brigadier General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. Armstrong had been a leader of the Black troops for the Union during the Civil War and was dedicated to improving educational opportunities for African Americans.
Washington studied academic subjects as well as agricultural. He also took courses in good manners and personal cleanliness. However, his personal favorite was debate, and he was such a good speaker that he was asked to give the class speech at his commencement in 1875.
He went on to study at Wayland Seminary in Washington, D.C., but had so impressed Armstrong that he was invited to return to Hampton as a teacher in 1879. It was Armstrong who would refer Washington for a role as the principal of a new school for African Americans in Tuskegee, Alabama.
The school was named Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, today's Tuskegee University. Washington assumed the role in 1881 at age 25 and would work at the Tuskegee Institute until his death in 1915.
Unlike Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois had been born free in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. On February 23, 1868, Alfred Du Bois, who was a barber, and Mary Savina Burghardt Du Bois, who was a domestic worker, welcomed a baby boy whom they named William Edward Burghardt Du Bois.
Mary Savina Burghardt was a free woman who was born to a land-owning black family. She was descended from Dutch, African, and English ancestors. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Tom Burghardt, who was a former slave but gained his freedom after serving in the American Revolution.
Alfred Du Bois was born in Haiti to a mixed-race Haitian mother and a mixed-race Bohemian father. As a young man, he migrated to New York where he served in the Civil War, but deserted his regiment shortly thereafter. He then met Mary Burghardt and started a family, but then also deserted his family 2 years after the birth of William Du Bois.
Given the mixed heritage of both his parents, Du Bois grew up identifying himself as mulatto. He freely attended school in his mostly white town, which was known for their opposition to slavery and moderate position on race. Therefore, he was enthusiastically supported in his academic studies by his white teachers.
In 1885, he enrolled in Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where he encountered Jim Crow laws for the first time in his life. This was the catalyst for his examination of the deep troubles of American racism.
He earned his bachelor's degree from Fisk University in 1888, and then went on to graduate school at Harvard University. After completing his master's degree in history, he was selected for a study abroad program concentrating on the studies of social sciences at the University of Berlin. And then he went on to earn a PhD in history from Harvard University, making him the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard in 1895.
Washington and Du Bois grew up significantly different, and perhaps this was the reason for their diverse approaches to addressing racial inequality in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Born enslaved, Washington understood struggle firsthand. He believed that Black Americans couldn't afford to fight for social and political rights until they proved their economic worth. His solution? Vocational training. Washington believed that African Americans should focus on vocational training and economic self-improvement before seeking political and social equality.
He argued that economic success would eventually lead to civil rights. Washington also heavily emphasized industrial educational practical skills and trades, advocating for African Americans to excel in farming, mechanics, and domestic work.
He argued that these areas, coupled with hard work, would eventually help Black Americans to become self-reliant. Washington became convinced that vocational education was the only means by which Blacks would become successful in America.
While at Tuskegee Institute, he put into practice his belief that the ultimate solution to the race problem was for Blacks to prove themselves worthy by becoming reliable and superior laborers, eventually making themselves indispensable to the economic well-being of the country.
Washington believed Blacks just needed the right form of education, an education that would be beneficial in an economic sense. He argued that Black education should be so directed that the greatest proportion of the mental strength of the masses will be brought to bear upon the everyday practical things of life, upon something that is needed to be done, and something which they will be permitted to do in the community in which they reside.
Du Bois rejected Washington's emphasis on vocational training and believed in education beyond just having a trade. Du Bois saw political activism, higher education, and protest as the keys to progress. He believed higher education, grounded in Black culture and community, was essential to Blacks knowing their value.
Du Bois felt higher education was a way to produce men and women highly trained in the cultural, political, and social needs of Black people, or rather, a way to build an intellectual army of activists to advance the Black community. He understood that higher education was integral to the black community maintaining a strong cultural base from that which to navigate and uplift themselves.
Men, we shall have only as we make manhood the object of the work of the schools. Intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world that was and is, and of the relation of men to it. This is the curriculum of the higher education which must underlie true life.
In the book, The Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois laid out his vision of the talented 10th. Now, this idea was that the top 10% of educated black men should lead the fight for civil rights. This talented 10th had to have character, intellectual appetite, and leadership qualities that would, through the process of higher education, not only convert them into exceptional leaders, but also into exceptional educators.
Du Bois saw these exceptional educators as essential to teaching because he was convinced that whether the talented 10th was teaching at elementary, secondary, trade, or college levels, a classical humanistic education was essential. Only by steeping themselves in the value of a liberal arts education could they hope to pass on its civilizing and edifying benefits to the masses.
Knowledge of life and its wider meaning has been the point of the Negro's deepest ignorance, and the sending out of teachers whose training has not been simply for breadwinning, but also for human culture, and has been of inestimable value in the training of these men.
Washington delivered his legendary Atlanta Compromise speech in 1895, where he suggested that black people should not push for immediate civil rights, but rather prove their worth through economic progress and moral character.
Washington urged African Americans to refrain from adamantly attempting to integrate with white America. Washington suggests that black people may have sought to rapid progress in the aftermath of the Civil War, alluding to the attempts by black leaders in the early phase of Reconstruction to gain seats in the legislature instead of attempting more gradual social advancement through real estate or industrial skill.
He advocated for a gradual emancipation of African Americans through hard work, economic improvement, and self-help. He analogized the newly emancipated black people to a ship lost at sea.
In his analogy, the lost ship signals a friendly vessel to indicate that its crew is dying of thirst. The other ship repeatedly instructs the troubled ship to cast down their bucket where they are, but the distressed vessel continues to plead for water. Finally, the distressed vessel heeds the other ship's instructions and lowers their bucket into the water. To their surprise, they find that they are sailing in fresh, sparkling water.
Washington uses this analogy to suggest that the black community in the South has sought help from outsiders instead of first looking to the people and opportunities that exist where they are.
Those of my race who depend on bettering their condition in a foreign land, or who underestimate the importance of cultivating friend relations with a southern white man who is their next door neighbor, I would say, cast down your bucket where you are. Cast it down, making friends in every manly way of the people of all races by whom you are surrounded.
Implying that the aid of the southern white population had not been requested. He states that there are opportunities in the South through which black individuals can become successful in agriculture, commerce, and other simple forms of labor.
He suggests that in their eagerness for freedom, the black people as a whole have attempted to advance too quickly, neglecting the reality that one must start at the bottom in order to eventually work their way up to find success.
Washington ends his speech by applauding the efforts of the Atlanta Exposition where the speech was given. He felt the exposition provided black people with a forum for showing their progress in the 30 years since slavery ended.
Washington promised that whites would have the cooperation of Black people in solving the great and intricate problem which God has laid at the doors of the South. Again, he asserts that economic and material progress in the Black community is what will lead to the end of racial animosity. Washington also believed that if Blacks and whites could work together for economic advancement, then prosperity and social harmony would come to the South.
In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress. In other words, don't fight segregation head on, work within the system.
Du Bois, on the other hand, supported direct activism in the form of legal challenges and protest. In 1905, he co-founded the Niagra Movement, which was a precursor to the NAACP.
The Niagra Movement was a national group of Black intellectuals. Their founding principles, as set forth in their Constitution, was, quote,
freedom of speech and criticism, an unfettered and unsubsidized press, manhood suffrage, the abolition of all caste distinctions based simply on race and color, the recognition of the principles of human brotherhood as a practical present creed, the recognition of the highest and best human training as the monopoly of no class or race, a belief in the dignity of labor, and united effort to realize these ideals under wise and courageous leadership.
Du Bois actively challenged racial injustice and insisted that Black people should not have to wait to become full citizens under the law. In 1909, he co-founded the NAACP, pushing for legal challenges to segregation and voter suppression, and actively challenged racial injustice through litigation and advocacy. He believed that conceding to white power structures, as Washington advised, was betrayal of true equality.
Washington sought to cooperate with white leaders and wanted support from white benefactors and avoided direct confrontation over segregation. His belief that training in various domestic and trade skills within an authoritarian and religious environment would produce a Black who would fit into the lower end of the occupational structure.
More importantly, this type of Black would know his place among whites and come to accept that place as proper. Washington understood that this was the kind of Black person white society wanted.
But critics, including Du Bois, saw his approach as accommodationist, too willing to accept second-class citizenship. For white Southerners, Washington's ideology was a splendid way to keep Blacks subservient and exploitable. For Northerners, it served as a way of calming racial tensions while simultaneously providing a well-trained underclass that could be used in the effort to industrialize the South.
For these reasons, wealthy philanthropists in both the North and the South were willing to give large grants to institutions that adopted this vocational model, while ignoring those institutions that remained academically oriented.
So who was right?
Washington argued for patience, self-improvement, and believed in economic progress first, while Du Bois prioritized political rights and demanded immediate change.
Washington promoted vocational training, while Du Bois emphasized higher education.
Washington was more conciliatory towards white society, while Du Bois was confrontational and demanded equality.
The truth, both men left an undeniable impact.
Washington's focus on economic empowerment laid the foundation for Black wealth building.
Du Bois's activism led to historic victories like Brown versus Board of Education and the Civil Rights Act.
Their debate wasn't just academic. It has shaped Black activism for generations.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with his belief in peaceful progress, had echoes of Washington's gradualism.
Malcolm X's militant demand for rights, that is pure Du Bois.
Their strategies were different, but together they carved a path toward justice.
These two giants, Washington and Du Bois, underscore the fact that there was not a single linear path to achieving racial equality in the nation. The struggle required African Americans to both battle and accommodate realities of segregation and discrimination to help future generations more fully realize the promise of America.
But what do you think? Was Washington's approach realistic or too passive? Was Du Bois's vision necessary or too radical for his time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest debates. And remember, history is not just about the past. It shapes our future. Until next time, adventure seekers, be true to yourselves, be patient with your neighbors, keep your mind sharp, and be the change you want to see in the world. Peace.
Peace.